Hey guys, welcome to another Ableton Live tutorial. This week we're going to be going over MIDI mapping and MIDI routing and some other general MIDI stuff that goes into the step sequencer. Alright, let's get it going. Okay, so there are three different types of MIDI information that we're going to be dealing with here. MIDI clips, MIDI mapping, and MIDI routing. So let's take a look at the MIDI clips first. So everything runs through the drum rack here, which we saw in an earlier video. And all that information is coming from a series of steps. So if I open this up, within the kick, there are all these different clips. All these clips have MIDI information in them that are sending data to that drum rack. So if I open the first one here, you'll see there's one 16th note sitting in this. If I go to the next one, it's another 16th note in a progressively farther position in the timeline, and so on and so forth, all the way down the line till it gets to the end. So all of these clips in the kick, snare, hi-hat, and percussion, these are all one-bar loops that hold one piece of MIDI information in progressively farther positions in the timeline. Now, all of these single MIDI clips, as you can see, are sitting in individual tracks. Now, each of these tracks, I'm actually sending the MIDI information. Expand this here so you can see it a bit better. So the MIDI 2 on every single one is going to the track in of the drum rack. So that this single instrument here is receiving data from all of these MIDI clips. So that ensures that all these individual notes are only being routed to that drum track. What helps tie all of this together, the MIDI clips and the MIDI routing, is a series of MIDI maps that are really essential to how the step sequencer operates. So I can open up my MIDI maps here so you can see that within this group, the master play button for everything in this kind of scene within this group are mapped to buttons on the launchpad. These function to trigger all of the loops at the same time, so there's no sync issues, there's no latency issues. I don't have to worry about turning on and off individual clips, just everything plays at the same time. In addition to that, the way that the steps are actually turned on and off then, since everything's playing at the same time, is through the track activation switches, which you can see every single one of these track activation switches are all mapped. Now, there are a total of 64 of these, which correspond to the 8x8 grid of buttons on the launchpad. So these parameters were set up in part by the physical limitations of the hardware I use and just the way that I conceive using this within those limitations. So I'll get out of MIDI map mode here. So when I turn on steps in the launchpad, these track activators turn on and off. So each one of these corresponds to a step. So the first one here, this is step 1.1.1 in the 16 note loop that the step sequencer plays for the kicks. So there's 16 tracks within the kick loop, turning data on and off for every progressive 16th note. That sends their info, as you can see, so it's on this kick layer, which is set like that because the MIDI is already being sent to the drum rack, and within the drum rack the kick is on this pad right here. So all these, whatever I name these, will show up because the MIDI is being sent to this, from this rather. The reason why there are 3 different scenes of MIDI info for each, the kick, snare, hi-hat, and percussion, is it's for an added playability function for the Launchpad, for the step sequencer. So as you can see in the first scene here, the kick starts at 1.1.1, and then each step goes farther down the line. Now, if I go to this one, you'll see it doesn't start in 1.1.1. It starts down here. And then these progressively go through again. And if I click on the third one, see it starts here. And again, works their way through. The reason for this is, as you can see again, I've got each of these master start buttons for each individual scene mapped to a button on the Launchpad. So essentially what this does, and the buttons are the same for all the steps. So the snare first scene launch button is the exact same as the kick launch button. So what this does is when I'm playing the step sequencer, I have a loop dialed up. It will play continuously the whole way through. But with these give me the ability to choose a start point for it, so I can improvise on the fly and kind of play around with it. So for example, if I've got kind of a 4 on the floor pattern, kicks on the 1s, and snares on 2, I can, without waiting for the loop to play through, I can trigger the kick on 1 and the snare on 2 in any pattern I want to kind of break up the monotonous 4 on the floor type vibe. It'll still completely stay in time because my global launch sync is set to a 16th note, so it'll always stay in sync, and I can always go back to that beginning loop by triggering this first scene. Now, the last piece of the puzzle is fairly straightforward, but it's very important. Now, for the drum rack, since I have all of this MIDI info being sent to it, as you can see, so here I'll play that. You can see everything in that kick launches at the same time when I trigger that. If I hit the master button on the Launchpad, everything launches all at the same time. Now, with all that information being sent to this, it's very important that I separate out and don't get any conflicting MIDI information sent. So that's why in the MIDI from tab, the input for this drum rack, it's set to only receive MIDI information from the Launchpad. So that avoids any conflict from any other MIDI CC data I may be sending out from other tracks for other reasons, or accidentally receiving information from any other MIDI hardware I might have plugged in at that time, like a keyboard or anything else. So pretty basic idea, but very, very essential to keeping everything in proper order. So there's a little bit of info on how the MIDI data, the MIDI routing, and the MIDI maps all work within this step sequencer template. So join back next week. I'll have some more videos for you, and take care. Bye.